Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're here to share information about the Toronto District School Board's cell phone mobile device use in schools policy and to hear from you. I'm John Chasty, Superintendent of Education. Also joining me are a number of panelists from different departments within the Toronto District School Board. And answering questions, Jack Nigro, Executive Superintendent of Education, and Claudine Tyrell, Secondary Principal. As you can see on the screen, there will be the names of the additional staff members from the panel, and they're going to assist as we work our way through the questions following a short presentation. Once we've gone through that short presentation in the form of a slide deck, we'll open it up to questions. Please use the Q&A function within Zoom to submit a question in writing. Note, if you clicked on the live webcast and didn't pre-register to receive the Zoom link, you won't be able to answer or ask a question during this presentation. During the webcast, we encourage you to complete a brief exit poll regarding how you found out about our consultation if you pre-registered and received a Zoom link. This will help us improve future communications with the community, and the poll button is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Click to access the poll at any point during the webcast. Also for the Zoom link, we have interpreters: Farsi, Cantonese, Dari, Portuguese, Spanish, and Mandarin. To access this service, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. We have many participants today, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Thank you again for being here. So we'll get started with our slide presentation.
I would ask if you're able to stand for the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine. If we could go to the next slide, please. And Jack.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Nigro. I'm the Executive Superintendent of Learning Center 4 at TDSB. I see a hand raised, and I think we're going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A in written form if you are following along. Just to introduce this policy initiative, by a resolution of the Board of Trustees on January 31st of this year, it was requested that we develop a cell phone and mobile device use policy in our schools. And that was followed a few months later by the ministry updating Policy and Program Memorandum 128 that outlines the Provincial Code of Conduct and School Board Codes of Conduct, with some more details on their thinking around cell phone and mobile device use in schools. So we're taking a different approach with this policy. We are using a pre-consultation phase that is atypical to this policy development process. Usually, when we develop a policy, we provide a draft to the general public for comment. In this policy, we are using the pre-consultation phase, which is this meeting and other opportunities for people to contribute their initial thinking. We're using this pre-consultation phase, which really ends in July, to develop the draft policy that we will then circulate in a consultation phase beginning in September. And Claudine will talk to you later about the timelines that we're using, and you'll see this pre-consultation phase along with the consultation phase leading up to the policy. So one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about, so just so you understand what's going to happen between now and February, is upon the release of the Policy and Program Memorandum 128 update from the ministry on April 28th, they set out the minimum requirements of what any school board policy will look like. They also specified that Those minimum requirements were to be in effect by September 1st, 2024. So in the next few slides, Claudine will talk to you about some of the aspects of the revised PPM and what the ministry wants to see minimally in every school board beginning in September. This policy development will go deeper than just the minimum requirements, and we'll be looking at some of the aspects of both the PPM and other things that we wanted to include in a policy, or we wanted to think about in the development in the policy throughout this presentation. So I am going to pass it over now to Claudine to talk to you about some of the specifics in the ministry revision of PPM 128 that go in effect in September. Next slide.
PPM 128, the minimum requirements for cell phones, mobile device use. So all members of the school community must not use a personal mobile device during instructional time, except under the circumstances. So for educational purposes, as directed by an educator, for health and medical purposes, and to support special education needs. Students in grades 7 to 12, at minimum, the local policy must require that personal mobile devices are stored out of view and powered off or set to silent mode during instructional time, except when there is use explicitly permitted by the educator under the circumstances outlined above. And if the educator sees a mobile device that is not stored out of view, they must require the device to be handed in for the instructional period, and the device must be placed by the student in a storage area in a location in the classroom designated by the educator. Students in grade 6 and below, at minimum, the local policy must require that students' personal mobile devices are stored out of view and powered off and set to silent mode throughout the full instructional day, except when their use is explicitly permitted by the educator under the circumstances outlined above. If the educator sees a personal mobile device that is not stored out of view, they must require the device to be handed in for the instructional day, and the device must be placed by the student in a storage area in a location decided by the principal. Next slide, please. Responsibility, progressive discipline, and best practices. The student is responsible for the personal mobile device, how they use it, and the consequences of not following the school board's policy on personal mobile device use. If the student does not hand in their personal device when they are required, they must be sent to the principal's office. Principals have the discretion under PPM 145, progressive discipline and promoting positive student behavior, to consider a range of responses to address this behavior, including suspension. To support the implementation of the above, the local policy must include an approach to enforcement of the restrictions that includes clear expectations of responsibility for students, educators, principals, and superintendents, best practices for educators on classroom management related to responsible use of technology, a requirement for schools to have an annual notification sent to parents and students reminding them of the policy, its requirements, and consequences for non-compliance. A requirement that the expectations and responsibilities under the local policy, the best practices for educators, and the annual notifications for parents be shared with all educators and principals. Restricting access to social media on school networks. School boards are required to restrict access to all social media platforms on school networks and school devices. Social media platforms can only be used by students at school for educational purposes directed by an educator. School boards can determine exception protocols for the use of social media for pedagogical or work-related purposes. The social media ban will not block SMS, text messages. And the timelines. So as Jack mentioned previously, we are in our pre-consultation phase, and that is from May to July. So pre-consultation with schools and community partners via the survey ends June 30th. We will have student focus groups during for secondary schools this summer. And the board code of conduct, PR 585, revised with new information and shared with stakeholders, will take place this summer, and the jurisdictional scan will be completed. In August 2024, this summer, the draft policy will be prepared and shared with internal TDSB committees for input, and the draft policy and report will be shared at the Governance and Policy Committee. This September, we have our public consultation, and so public consultation begins on the draft policy, and the revised board code of conduct based on PPM 128 will take effect on September 1st, 2024. In November, we have our updated draft policy, and public consultations will end at that point. And the updated draft policy will be shared with internal TDSB committees for approval. In February 2025, this is where we look for policy approval. The draft policy will be shared at the Governance and Policy Committee for approval, and the draft policy will be shared at the regular board meeting for approval. And the online survey, cell phone, mobile device use in school policy. So we ask that you consider completing our online survey to share feedback and provide input. And when you're responding to the questions, we wanted you to think about the broad use of mobile devices in the classroom during instructional time and during school hours. And answers are anonymous, and feedback will be summarized for consideration in the new policy. And there's the link to access the policy and any other information that you would like regarding PPM 128 and the cell phone mobile device use in schools. Next slide. And we ask that you please submit your questions within Zoom. And we thank you again for participating in today's webinar. So we'll start to respond to the questions.
Thank you, Claudine. And folks, John, Claudine, and I will be looking at the questions, trying to group them together in themes, and answering them in a bit of a rote way. We will to each take a group of questions consecutively. So I'll start, and just wanted to comment that some of these things in the PPM that have been listed around storing, for example, there were many questions yesterday that we answered about, like, how will we store them? The details have not been fully worked out yet. And so we're open to your suggestions on how to store them. You can indicate what your thinking is in this regard by using the survey. And there was a link provided, and we're going to try to get that link posted in the chat. So far, we've had about 20,000 responses to the survey, and we're looking forward to getting your input soon, if not this evening, maybe in the next couple of days. So, and the first question that I'm seeing here is, what other ways can parent caregivers engage with questions about the potential policy if they miss these sessions? Well, the survey is one of them, and every stakeholder in TDSB received an email with the survey link a couple of weeks ago when the consultation started. I believe they started on May 27th. So we're a few weeks in. We've received 20,000 responses so far, and we look forward to receiving more, including your input. So over to the next group of questions, John.
We have a question which states that individual's family supports the ban, and they've seen how cell phones degrade the classroom experience at the high school. And that cell phone rules are only being enforced in 2 of 4 classes, and in some classes, teachers are on their phones. The question has to do with a concern about safe schools incidents, and then students posting that information on social media to mock other students, be it TikTok or other types of things. So with that concern being put out there, one of the things I'll reinforce, and I'm going to pass it over to Dill in Caring and Safe Schools to talk a bit about his perspective on this. Under PPM 128, there is an area there that is very specific about these types of things happening in schools. And it states that all members of the school community shall not record, take, or share non-consensual recordings or photos of members of the school community. So that is something that is significant in terms of, be it a student or any other member of the community recording without the consent of an individual within the school community. And Dill, I'm wondering if you can add to that, particularly the part about the caring and safe schools aspect of things, please.
Yeah, happy to give some input in this, John. Good evening, everyone. From a caring and safe school perspective, we have seen incidents throughout the year and multiple years of students recording other students, recording staff, and it is very concerning to us in caring and safe schools and in the board. So whenever a principal or school becomes aware of such video recordings, we do investigate and we call the student down to the office. If they have a video on them, we ask them to delete it. Whenever there's a situation where there's a threat made or something that is illegal, we involve the police. The police are involved. As you probably know, when students are 12 years of age and older, they're subject to the criminal code and they could be charged. Under 12 years of age, we when this is happening, we involve the parents, try to educate the kids about the dangers of doing such things. And we follow our progressive discipline model, which includes many interventions, including education, prevention, and even with the cell phone mobile device policy that is coming in September, we are still going to be using a progressive discipline model to educate and to prevent. And when students do, like the minimum requirement is when students do use the phone in class or mobile device, it will be stored. And if they refuse to store it, they will be referred to the principal or the office for further discussion. And at that point, we follow a progressive discipline model where the first instance, it could be a conversation with parent, a verbal warning. It could escalate to something more formal. And if it continues, ultimately a suspension. So these are things that are happening. The policies that we have in place currently, we do have provisions to deal with these sorts of matters right now. And with this new policy, we're going to have a little bit more clearer expectations with respect to mobile devices. I hope that helps, John.
Yeah, thanks, Dill. That's important information. And just a comment to add to that. Keep in mind, and Claudine had reviewed this earlier in PPM 128. So it's grade 7 to 12. Essentially, they need to be out of sight and stored when in the classroom. That's the bare minimum. And what we're consulting about for this policy is the types of latitude in terms of using them outside of that context of the classroom. The other part is for kindergarten to grade 6. They're not to be used during the school day at all. So it's very different for those two different, very different for the two grade divisions along the way there. The next question relates to how will access to social media sites be handled for students who have their own data plan? And what is specific in terms of the ban from PPM 128's perspective, and we can still look at that, and including looking at what constitutes social media. It has to do with board supported devices. For example, we have iPads, we have Chromebooks, and for students who have their own data plan, that would be separate from board supported devices on board Wi-Fi. And Kevin Bradbeer from our IT department, he's on the webcast today. And Kevin, I'm wondering if you could comment or elaborate a little bit on that, both on the social media sites as well as the data plan aspect, please.
Sure, thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. So social media sites will be blocked at our network level. So that means that whether you're on a hardwired or wireless network, the social media sites that are provided to us by the Ministry of Education will be blocked. So if a student's using a personal device, such as a cellular phone, through TDSB Wi-Fi, they will not be able to access those sites. If they're using a TDSB provided device, such as a Chromebook or an iPad, they will not be able to access those sites. However, if they are using a personal data plan, those sites will remain available. We don't have any ability to block sites from being accessed via what would be considered like a private network, such as a Rogers Bell, Freedom Mobile, cellular type of connection. John, let me know if there's anything else I can add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And just connected to that, we'll ask, there's one more question. Is there going to be a separate policy for smartwatches? We wanted to note that any device which connects to the internet, including smartwatches, are part of the mobile device, will be part of the mobile device policy, because that has been laid out through PPM 128 by the Ministry of Education. So they have defined what constitutes a mobile device, and that includes any device that hooks up to the internet, and that includes smartwatches. So that's a question that was asked, which is connected to that.
Thank you, John. We're getting hundreds of questions in the chat, and we're trying to work through themes that we see. So I'm going to go over to Claudine. Claudine?
Yes. I think that, again, there was another question around the ban of social media, and Kevin touched on that. There was also a question involving filming that Dill touched on, and I just wanted to say in the PPM, it does outline that students are not able to film or take pictures of others. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well, that's outlined in the PPM. We just didn't, the document is very long, and we provided the most salient pieces for tonight.
Thank you, Claudine. Getting a number of questions on enforcement. And so, some questions on how the teachers will enforce this, potentially, with students who don't want to comply. Will the teachers be part of this policy and their own use? And so the answer to the latter question, yes, all staff and students in a school are covered by this policy and with the same expectations. In terms of enforcement, this is really like any other infraction that happens in a school and is dealt with seriously and in a progressive discipline manner. And so those decisions are made locally by the teacher as a first step, and then as necessary with principal assistance. So those are general types of responses to the questions of enforcement. So I'm going to go to John next for the next question. John, your mic's not on.
Apologies. Connected to the IT question, and Kevin, if you could help us out here again, has to do with Chromebooks. And this came up in the webcast yesterday a few times as well, in terms of students accessing Chromebooks and the blocking of those sites or parental controls relating to social media once they leave the school and they take the Chromebooks home. So Kevin, I'm hoping you can help us with that.
Sure. So when a device leaves the TDSB property, so the school or any of our other physical locations, our network protections are no longer in effect. They are only available when you are inside one of our buildings. When a device is used in a public library, a home, etc., the network restrictions, filters, etc., that exist in those locations are what governs the use of the internet on those particular devices. So if a family has filters set up at home, those will be applied to the Chromebook at home. If a family has a firewall, that will apply as well. If families are looking for assistance in terms of blocking particular sites, TDSB does have a tool available called Blocksy, which allows a family to create essentially a list of sites that are not accessible So just for example, you might have, Discord or YouTube or something like that families don't wish their children to access. That can be added to a list that is no longer accessible from home when that particular device is being used. So for a TDSB Chromebook, there is a tool called Blocksy available, and that can be requested through your school's principal.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Let's go over to Claudine. Go ahead, Claudine.
There's a question here about students who require technology for if they have an IEP. And again, the PPM stipulates that students who require the use of a mobile device for special education needs, learning needs, as well as medical needs, the exception will be made for those students.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next series of questions. There are a number of questions around which social media sites will be blocked. And that's something that has not been determined yet. There's even some controversy on whether a site is a social media site or not. And so that more clarity on that is coming. And once again, it's important to note here that social media sites are only blocked on the school network. And I saw a few questions around ideas on how to block cell phone signals, data signals themselves. To date, we have considered this, but find that it's practically not possible. Kevin, I'll ask you to comment in any way around this particular point. Some comments seem to advocate for blocking data in schools. Any comments on that one?
So that technology does exist, and someone had referenced that a correctional institution, they employ technology like that to try to block mobile and cellular signals. That to deploy that kind of technology across all of our 584 physical schools would be quite expensive. And it would also then infringe on the ability of students to use those devices after school is over, for example, staff use of their own personal devices, staff use of their board provided devices. So it wouldn't just apply necessarily to students at a particular time of day. It would be an all or nothing approach. And it is extremely expensive to deploy that. And I would also say it's not 100% reliable either. So there are times when it works well, there are times when it does not work quite as well. So it would not be a solution that we would have a lot of confidence in at the moment, or quite frankly, the financial resources to pursue at the moment.
Thank you, Kevin. John, you're next.
Okay, there's a question, what policy is going to be implemented in September if the draft policy is only being created in November? That's a great question. And keeping in mind that the resolution from the trustees came a number of months before the ministry's announcement on April the 28th, and we'd already started our policy pre-consultation, the development of the survey that's online right now, and our whole process based on our policies and procedures about how we draft a new policy. So when this was announced on April 28th, this now has to be integrated into TDSB's current code of conduct. So that process is happening right now because it has to be in place for September 1st. There is no choice. We can't wait until November or February when the final policy is passed by the trustees. So what we're working on right now is revising our code of conduct based on PPM 128 to include the minimum of what they say has to be in place in school boards in Ontario beginning on September the 1st. And the other thing to keep in mind relating to that is it impacts on student agendas. Some schools still have print student agendas. It impacts on TDSB Connects. So that's access for students to their timetables on their own personal device and to other information about the school where there's a code of conduct. So what will happen before September? We're going to be communicating with principals and vice principals. There'll be additional communications we understand from the ministry about PPM 128 at the same time. We also understand that there's going to be some signage and other types of marketing types of materials that will come from the Ministry of Education. But in the meantime, communication with our principals, vice principals, continuing forward with our focus groups. Hopefully the principals are sharing that with their staffs before the end of the year, even though we have a very compressed timeline. And in the fall, the code of conducts will be updated. There'll be the typical high school assemblies where they're reviewed with students in terms of how that is all going to work out. So it will be implemented. The minimum requirements that you saw earlier will be implemented, and then we'll be moving forward from there based on what the final policy is beyond that.
Thank you, John. Claudine, to you.
So we have two questions. One about cell phones being stored for students from grade 7 to 12 and where they need to be stored. And another question in terms of storage as well, coming from a teacher. So I just want to read again the minimum requirements for PPM 128 under responsibility, progressive discipline, and best practices. The student is responsible for their personal mobile device, how they use it, and the consequences of not following the school board's policy on personal mobile device use. But also, two, I wanted to speak about when we talk about students in grade 7 to 12, it indicates if the educator sees a personal mobile device that is not stored out of view, they must require the device to be handed in for the instructional period, and the device must be placed by the student in a storage area in the location in the classroom designated by the educator. So I hope that clarifies things for both questions.
Thank you, Claudine. I picked up on two questions that I want to just discuss. The first is around education around the use of social media and perhaps screen time, and how much of the policy will address that, or the educational piece about this address those concerns. And certainly that is something that is being considered as part of this to really educate students on some of the concerns around the amount of screen time they have, as well as the social media use and how that can be compromising in certain ways. So that's certainly part of the consideration as we develop this policy, the education that will go around it. More questions around enforcement, and a concern that based on current experiences, and I believe some teachers are with us tonight, they believe that they may be spending a lot of time doing this in terms of talking about cell phones and putting cell phones away, or asking students to bring them to them. What we've actually seen in a few pilot projects that we've studied, and one specifically in TDSB, is that things improve pretty quickly in terms of, first of all, recognizing that now there's enforcement will happen, and change happens when this begins to be known and students become accustomed to it, etc. So we're hopeful that what we've seen in certain pilot projects extends to the reality in our classrooms as we begin to implement this policy in the fall. John, over to
Jack,
you.
just to piggyback
Yeah, go ahead.
on that. Yeah, just to piggyback on that a little bit. You mentioned the curricular part, and we have Nicole Miller. She's an elementary principal in our system. And Ms. Miller, I'm wondering if you just comment on, from an elementary perspective, where students K to 6 are not going to have access to phones at all. Is there any aspect of the curriculum that covers or works with students to teach them when they're at a younger age about mobile devices and those types of things?
Sure. We actually have a number of systems in place in elementary. The first being that every elementary school has to have a Caring and Safe Schools committee. And on that committee, an element of that is talking and thinking about bullying. And of course, part of bullying, and one of the main parts that would come up in this with this, is cyberbullying, right? So there's a whole component there of planning that has to be built into school improvement planning that deals with cyberbullying, but built right into our new Ontario curriculum, especially in grade 7 and grade 8, there's digital citizenship. And a key part of that is teaching kids like what's safe to do online, what's good data that you're getting. Like if you're searching on a site, what's good data, what's bad data, and being able to kind of be good digital citizens. And there's actually a second piece in the grade 7 health curriculum where there's a whole unit about digital citizenship and online safety and keeping yourself and your friends safe in the things that you say and you do online. So I know also many schools, including mine, have done work around human trafficking and a lot of things that kind of are tangentially related to having cell phones and having unfettered access to the internet. So there is a huge component of education to use of cell phones. And so I think that's there. And then there's the reality of the kids being online with their friends, right? So it is going to be a bit of a challenge, I think. And to Jack's point, monitoring and enforcing, it really has to be rooted in education.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miller. And not to put Ms. Tyrell on the spot, because we have a wide range of secondary courses. When we take a look at secondary schools, what types of things are done in secondary schools where it's a lot more course specific in that area?
I mean, we can start with the science with science courses and brain development. We can talk about, as Nicole mentioned as well, in our healthy and active living classes, we talk about healthy relationships. And there too, you see the use of mobile devices and how it impacts healthy relationships. We also see it in our civics courses when we talk about mobile device use in law. When you can and cannot use it, and the legal implications of its use. There are a lot of areas that we can touch on it. Definitely a lot of expectations across all the courses where we learn about it.
Okay, thank you. And just to get to one of the other questions that ties in a little bit with this, the aspect of the curricular nature and what Jack and Claudine and Nicole had just mentioned, is how will the TDSB be doing site monitoring to make sure teachers and staff are enforcing the ban? So it's one of the things we wanted to talk about is that this is a huge cultural shift for some schools. There are some things going on in schools right now where principals working with school communities have already put a ban of sorts in place on their own based on that feedback from parents, in some cases from students. As Jack had mentioned, the example of the secondary school in our board who's working in that direction. There's going to be challenges. And I think one of the benefits we have is that we are in the process of developing this policy. So as we implement PPM 128 in the fall, and we face those challenges, the questions we'll need to ask from throughout the system through the different community stakeholders is what is going right, what is going wrong, what are best practices, what does storage look like, what is working, what's not working. And we have the ability to, as we're working our way through and drafting the policy, to make some changes, not to PPM 128, because that's the bare minimum, but to make it more of a TDSB type of policy that relates to more feedback from people within the TDSB. But it will be a cultural shift. There's no question in some schools, it'll be a cultural shift. And for us, it's about making sure that we understand the expectations going into the fall from a caring and safe schools perspective. It's about looking at every student when an issue does pop up and looking at the individual circumstances of that student before we react.
Thank you, John. Let's go to Claudine for the next question.
I'm going to join forces with Nicole on this one. We've had some questions around how this is going to be reflected on the report card. And from a secondary standpoint, oftentimes when we talk about cell phone use and maybe misuse, we can talk about that when it's reflected in the learning skills and work habits. And I was just wondering if Nicole, you had anything to add there.
For sure. And there will be work around it as well, especially as I mentioned in the grade 7 health curriculum. There's an expectation of a project and an artifact where students really do get to delve into, say, the online code of conduct for TDSB or some other element of online safety and have to produce a project for that, which would then be reflected on the report card as well. And as Claudine said, the learning skills for sure, responsibility and collaboration, and a lot of the learning skills would actually tie into this well.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudine and Nicole, for that. Folks, the questions are coming in fast and furious, and it looks like we're not going to be able to answer them all in the hour that we put aside, but we will take them away and of course consider them. But the next, I noticed questions about experts that we will be consulting as part of this process. And so I want you to know, and I'll ask the team to enlighten us with the complete list, but I want you to know that we are accessing various experts, both at a reference table and an expert panel table, as well as we've met with student groups, student leadership groups, and there's a parental consultation going on in some of our schools. So our reach is wide. We are planning to do this both for the pre-consultation, which again, for those of us that joined us late, this pre-consultation phase that we are in has as its goal to develop a draft policy that we will then bring forward in September in another consultation phase once we have the draft. But this consultation phase is to develop a draft, which actually is a little different than the usual TDSB policy development process. But we think it's worthwhile to spend this time to get some initial thoughts. And so I'm going to ask the team to talk about the expert and reference panels. So John, could you just give us an idea of the types of organizations that have already indicated some consent to joining those expert and reference panels?
Yeah, sure, Jack. They're focus groups, and we have focus groups with our various employee groups that are going forward over the next week or two. In terms of an opportunity, for example, for a community group or a parent group to provide input as a group, the survey that we referenced earlier, which is on the website, there is a group option where a group can go through and submit their responses and feedback in writing. And many of the questions are open-ended types of questions because we are in that pre-consultation phase. So any group can go in and complete and submit something that we would consider. In terms of the panels that we have a reference panel and we have an expert panel. And there is a number of different organizations that have been invited or individuals who've been invited. The reference panel are community organizations or individuals who advocate for students, and including the groups or individuals who've been invited, an Indigenous elder, secondary school graduate, Kids Help Phone, Children's Aid Society of Toronto, Native Child Family Services, Legal Aid of Toronto, from the Justice for Children and Youth area, and Victim Services Toronto. So the reference panel, again, student advocacy, those are the groups that have been invited to date to participate and provide us with feedback in both phases of the consultation. In terms of the expert group, which has a bit of a different focus, it's based on research policy, particularly research with youth, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, School Mental Health Ontario, the Wellesley Institute, and the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto. That would encompass sort of the collectives that are involved in providing feedback to us as we work our way through both phases of this process.
Thank you, John. And I've seen a few questions on gaming sites and concerns from those in this pre-consultation webinar around blocking gaming sites. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about blocking and the types of sites that are blocked in TDSB?
Sure. So today, sites are blocked in our district according to categories. So we have a service that we purchase from a company that blocks websites according to categories. So for example, hate and racism, adult content, pornography. There are a number of categories we subscribe to. Gaming site today is not one of those categories. We do have the ability to block in a specific or an individual site if we need to. And I think the ministry is going to be providing direction to the districts to say, we would like you to block, I'm just making up a number, these 5 particular social media sites. They may choose to include gaming sites in that classification, or they may not. The district does have the ability at any time to make a decision to say, well, we're going to go ahead and block, this particular site or that particular site. By doing so, we have to be conscious, though, that we're obviously blocking it for everyone and every possible usage. We do have extracurricular clubs in many of our middle and high schools that are focused on gaming. And in fact, we even have some esports teams that are focused on gaming. So if we were to block the particular site they use for the, kind of the school related clubs and teams, we would be blocking it for everyone. So we always have to be cognizant of understanding the full impact of decisions like that.
Thank you, Kevin. And that often points to some of the complexities of, issues such as blocking, right? So you block one type of site. How does it impede access for those that might need it for different purposes? And these are decisions that the board needs to make on a daily basis, in a wide variety of areas. So thank you for that question, that series of questions. There are quite a few about those. John, the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to note and to add on to your response, Jack, and Kevin's response, that the Ministry for Social Media allows boards to grant exemptions based on what an individual school, an individual teacher may need in order to work in a classroom with students. So that is a process that we're going to have to develop to share with our schools, that if they want to apply for an exemption and how that would work. Obviously, it's going to involve our IT department and our principal in terms of working our way through that process. And that's exemptions for social media, and it would be in terms of the cell phone using devices in the classroom, that's designated by the educator. So there's some differences between those two things, but it does allow that flexibility for learning. And I'll just give you one example from one of the student focus groups that we had. A student in one of the secondary schools said that her science teacher uses a specific app that allows you to recognize and take photographs of plants. And when you take a photograph of that plant, it tells you what the species of that plant is and all the characteristics of the plant. So there's a unit in the class that's been developed around a free app that students can download onto their mobile devices or a board or use through a board device, and then identify, and it's part of a science curriculum in grade 9 at one of our secondary schools. So that's just one example where when we get that feedback, we have to look at what's that process for an exemption. Getting back to one of the questions, and there's many questions about storage, it states that the student is to put the device in a designated place, and there's protection for the teacher so we don't have students accusing us of breaking a smartwatch, etc. That is exactly what it says. And just to share some of the feedback we've already heard of things that are going on in schools. Some schools, even before we started talking about this year, have put measures in place, for example, bins, fairly low cost with an inventory, or pouches with students' names on it. We know that there are some school boards that are using devices for K to 8, K to 6, where they go in, they're locked during the day. There's a place where they're securely stored, for example, a vault in the main office. And then at the end of the day, they come and they bring them out. And in some cases, there's carts where they're charged. Another example we heard from a secondary school is where, in order to have students not be so much tempted to want to reach for their cell phone, they have a fresh supply of paper bags. So the idea is, if you can't ignore your phone and you put it on silent, you put it in the paper bag, you curl up the paper bag, you put it on the corner of your desk. And if you go and open it, it makes a big noise and it distracts everyone. And it's just sort of a reminder of storage. And maybe the paper bag goes in the knapsack or whatever the case may be. So there are some really good ideas that we need to hear out there. We don't have any one solution. Some cost money, some are very inexpensive. And it's getting those best ideas and best practices before the fall and sharing as many as we can with schools as we're going forward and what that looks like within our system.
Thank you, John. Claudine, we're going to go to you. And I see that we have 5 minutes left, so we're going to try to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes. Claudine, to you.
I just wanted to encourage teachers to respond to the survey. We have a question asking how teachers are being consulted specifically, and we ask that you respond to the survey. You can either respond to it individually or as a group of teachers respond to it, but it would be really helpful to get your input.
Yeah, and Claudine, just to add to that, we do have a focus group of all the various teachers federations and I believe that focus group is taking place in a week or so. All of the elementary occasional and secondary occasional and full-time teaching federations have responded positively to attending that focus group. So all teachers within the system will be represented at the table through their federations, in addition to what Claudine said.
All right, John, we're getting support for your paper bag solution in the comments in the private chat. So the next question that I saw was about funding and whether the ministry is providing funding support for the storage solutions. We have heard no announcement yet from the ministry on any type of financial support for this policy change, the PPM change for all school boards, but we'll continue to, seek that support and seek some solutions that make sense for TDSB schools. Now the other thing I'm seeing, folks, is many questions, or sorry, many comments. And so what I'd like to encourage you to do is to visit our survey at the end of this webinar and make those comments be known that you're putting into the chat now or into the Q&A box, and others on the many questions that we've asked in the survey. The survey is differentiated according to role. And so if you are a parent, you will get the parent version of the survey. If you are an educator, you'll get that version of the survey. So it's very specific depending on who's responding. All right. Are there any other, with 2 minutes left, are there any other questions we want to look at in the chat? And we're trying to group big themes. Let's see now. Charging devices, will they have access to that?
I think that's a local school thing that happened, not.
Yes.
And Jack, you may have already talked about the experts. I think you mentioned it briefly, but I noticed that Margaret, or if Margaret's online from Parent and Community Engagement, in terms of the focus of that department in getting feedback and the different parent groups and working on professional development to support school councils and that type of thing. Margaret's there.
We may have lost
Margaret. Okay,
Margaret, but I do know that there will be a parent component to this and support for parents. That's been asked a number of times. How will you support parents in this? By the way, these things are happening already. I know of schools that are talking about internet safety, talking about social media and concerns about social media. So these things are happening already. And with the advent of this policy, we're sure to see more at the school level, and local principals will make decisions based on what they feel their community needs in consultation with organizations like school council and the parent and community engagement office as well. So I see that we have now come to 7:30. And I want to thank, first of all, the team that joined us tonight to answer your questions. And by the way, folks, there were a few people in the background assembling questions, grouping them. So I want to thank those that were doing that good work. And also thank you for attending and for taking some time to visit our website with the survey that will be accessible for the next little while, and encourage you to take that survey, tell your friends about that survey, issue a group response if you're a group of teachers or parents, but just tell us what you're thinking. We all benefit when we hear from educators and community and parents. So once again, thank you, everyone. And please visit our survey. Have a
Yeah,
good
don't-
day. Yep.
And don't forget to complete the poll. On the
Oh,
bottom.
yes, there's a
Yep.
poll. Okay, so one more prompt for the poll. There it is. Okay, so the poll question is being asked of you. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Munchu. That was great. Thanks, everyone. That was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave the webinars, and Margaret could end this.
Okay.
We still have some public in this room. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Munchu. Good night.